Our next session is a travel advice clinic with our good friends at Wanderlust Magazine. And they have a wonderful team of experts here today, led by Lynn Hughes, the founding editor, Wanderlust. They will all be discussing the impact of coronavirus and Brexit on travel and give you some top tips on how best to travel in the next year and beyond. If you'd like to ask Lynn and the panel a question, just post it in the live chat box and they will answer as many as they can. So enjoy this next session.
Good afternoon, everybody. And yes, welcome to this Wanderlust Travel Advice panel. And what a grim day. I wonder if it is where you are too. It certainly is here. In fact, in a minute, I'm going to ask my esteemed panel where they are all sitting and what the weather is like where they are. So when destinations approached me to put this panel together, I thought, right, we've got so many issues at the moment that we really do need a really heavy-hitting panel, some real travel gurus. Who could I ask? Well, I'm delighted that I've found some terrific panelists today. So just to introduce you, we have got Chris O'Hara. Chris, can you wave? Yes, Chris is the co-founder and sales director of the True Traveller, the go-to insurer for adventure travelers and backpackers. And before that, Chris was at Trailfinders for many years. He's traveled to over 50 countries and he has a wealth of knowledge on all things travel. And Chris, so where are you sitting? Because we can see your garden, I presume, in the background. Where are you today?
Yes, indeed. I'm in not so sunny Buckinghamshire, where it's fairly it's fairly warm, but I'd rather be in the Caribbean, I think.
Oh, yes, well, wouldn't we all? Okay, and so next, let's go to Paul Charles. Paul is a former BBC News presenter and advisor to Sir Richard Branson. And he's founder and CEO of the PC Agency, a leading travel PR and communications agency based in London. Paul has been at the forefront of the coronavirus crisis, appearing as the leading comment and advisor about the travel and tourism sector. So you may well have seen him on your television screens through this crisis. So welcome, Paul. And where are you? That looks a very nice living room, wherever you are.
Thank you, Lynn. I am in West London, and this is my home office. So behind me are some features we've achieved over the years, and keeps me on my toes, seeing, I don't know if you can see it, but a record in the corner, which is when I was in Jamaica with Sir Richard Branson, singing with Bob Marley's wife and Bob Marley's sons, singing One Love in Bob Marley's studio. It was quite an occasion.
Really? Oh gosh, that must have been. Oh, I wish we could sit and gossip about that rather than the issues we are going to have to talk about. Yeah, maybe later. Yeah. Okay, and then last but not least, we have Chris Wright, the managing director of the Sunvil Group. So Chris started his career as a holiday rep before joining Sunvil. He's a fervent Greekophile and a strong advocate of sustainable tourism. So Chris, where are you this afternoon?
I'm feeling very lucky. I'm coming live from Corfu this afternoon, where it's a sunny 20 degrees. So yeah, feeling very lucky.
Oh, jealous or what? And of course, though, that is one of the big trends we're seeing at the moment, isn't it? Or there's a lot of talk of this, that we'll be able to in future. Now we're all getting used to working from home. We'll be able to take workations, is the buzzword, and actually sit and work overseas. So is that the idea, Chris? Is that what you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I'd been working from my kitchen table in Slough for most of the lockdown. I came over here for a meeting back at the end of November and decided it was no different working from the kitchen table here than it was at home. So yeah, took the decision to hunker away here nice and safely, where I think there's been approximately about 1 case or 0 cases a day recorded, and Corfu's been one of the only green destinations in the whole of Europe over the winter period. So yeah, feeling very lucky to be bunkered away down here.
Oh, perfect. Well, yes, we're very jealous of you. And obviously, this is a very different situation to the one we've heard about the last 24 hours about the poor influencers who are stranded in Dubai and were making the news last night. Paul, I'm sure you've got something to say about them.
Well, Priti Patel obviously highlighted them earlier in the week when she was talking about influencers who shouldn't be in Dubai at the moment. And frankly, I think they have given travel a bad name. They have been basically doing what 99.9% of people can't do at the moment globally, and have been really not making themselves popular. So that's one thing I do agree with Priti Patel on. And I think it's right that she highlighted it. And in fact, it's become the subject of a government communications campaign this morning.
Oh, right. Okay, glad to hear it. And yeah, I suppose I should just say very briefly for those who didn't catch, I'm Lynn Hughes. I'm the founding editor of Wanderlust, and we're delighted because we won Travel Magazine of the Year this week, which was great news and great for our team because it obviously has been a very difficult year in the travel industry and for travel magazines. So, and I was going to send a reminder to fill the chat box with questions, but I see there are lots of questions coming in. So what we'll do is I will ask the panel a few questions about the current situation, but we will then try and work through as many questions as we can. So thank you for those questions. It's great to see so many coming in. But I think, first of all, Corfu, Chris, I think we'll call you that for this session. As I would say, it has been a pretty brutal year for the industry. You know, a year ago, you and I were on a stage at the Destination Show, and we were all upbeat about what was happening in travel, and then, gosh, who would have predicted all this? So, as one of the travel companies, Sunvil, and indeed one of the travel companies that are seen as being one of the good guys in dealing with all of this, what are the sort of issues that you have had to face since the pandemic started?
I think the first issue we saw at the end of March was when borders started to close, was having to repatriate people from around the world. So we had a mass evacuation from mainly South America, where it was a particularly busy time for us down there in sort of Peru, Guatemala, Ecuador. And within the space of about 3 days, we suddenly had to get everybody back. And as we were getting people back, those borders were closing behind us. So we were very lucky. We managed to get everybody back before flights stopped. But that was really the start of things. And then over the next few months, so really sort of March, April, we were all forced to be working from home. And as everybody else around the country was sort of being furloughed and sort of put on leave, the travel industry was sort of very busy rebooking and deferring holidays. So all those bookings that we'd taken over the previous year, we then had to have the horrible task of sort of either cancelling, and the majority of cases in our case, we managed to defer them through to 2021. We were very lucky. We've got a loyal clientele. But if anything, over those months, March, April, May, we were busier than we would have ever been, and sort of just rebooking and making sure that we had somebody at the end of the phone to answer queries as we came through. And that served as well, I think, because we did look after all of our guests. They had somebody to talk to. And it meant that we could be there and answer queries, but it also meant that we weren't able to make use of the furlough scheme. So the financial impact on us was particularly harsh.
Yes, I can imagine. And no, it really has hit. In fact, talking about the financial hit that the industry has taken, does that mean, and I see we've already had a question or two about it, does that mean that prices are going to rise this year? So, for instance, Paul, obviously, you've got a strong knowledge and background in aviation. Will the cost of flights go up?
Yes, it will. I think you're going to see costs rising across the board, actually, for packages, for airline tickets, pretty well between 8 and 20%, depending on where you're going. So there will be, of course, less frequency. There are fewer flights, fewer destinations to fly to, and fewer aircraft flying anywhere around the world. Something like 40% are still in storage. So it's not a pretty picture. And as a result, many providers, be they airlines or operators, are really having to raise their prices to recoup some of the losses that they've made. The airlines in particular, Lynn, I'm really concerned about. I think you're going to see casualties emerge very quickly based on the latest quarantine measures, which are growing around the world. And airlines are simply not built for a pandemic. They only make money when the planes are flying. and they only make money when they're getting forward bookings coming in. And of course, as we know, the forward bookings are barely coming in, and there's a distinct lack of confidence among consumers at the moment. So it's not a pretty time, and we're going to see further casualties and sadly, a lot more losses and job losses.
But does that mean we should be worried about booking flights? And that doesn't. I mean, we all understand that situation, but it doesn't exactly inspire confidence in itself. So what do we do about that?
Well, this is the big picture. This is the big issue now, in that you really need to be confident about who you're booking with. So obviously, booking with a tour operator would make more sense at the moment than necessarily booking direct with an airline. And secondly, obviously make sure you're insured so you can maximize as far as possible what I'm sure Chris will talk about in terms of your cover. Thirdly, I think it's really important to be booking knowing you're flying with an airline that's got a good track record. It's the bigger airlines who still have some cash in the bank. And it's important to bear in mind the financial position will be important. So yeah, you've got to be really careful as a consumer at the moment. Obviously, we all want you to book. We all want confidence to return. And that's, I'm sure, what we'll talk about over the next few minutes. But you've got to be careful about who you're booking with. And that's, one of the outtakes you need from this clinic.
Yeah. Okay, absolutely. Chris O'Hara, and I think we're getting loads of questions about insurance coming, not surprisingly. But to go back to that question again about will prices rise, will insurance premiums go up? And indeed, somebody's asked, will they go up for more for perhaps older people?
It's a very good point. I think the answer is yes, indeed, they will. And just to put that in perspective for everybody, you may remember that approximately 11 years ago, we had the Icelandic ash cloud. Now, that was a 6-day event. And just alone on cancellation and curtailment claims, the ABI were reckoning about £62 million worth of cancellation claims. Now, to put that in perspective, COVID claims since March last year, 2020, they currently are standing at about 275 million. Now, bearing in mind the volcanic ash cloud was a record, the coronavirus pandemic does sort of blow it out of the water, really. We have got, I agree with Paul, we've got a lot of difficulties ahead within the whole industry. And I think that, needless to say, premiums, unfortunately, will have to rise.
And Chris, as a tour company, will the holidays you offer, will they have to go up?
It's very much supply and demand, and I think looking at prices at the moment, definitely for the latter part of the year, for September, August, September time, you've already got a lot of bookings that were deferred from 2020, and so availability is tight. Prices are holding their own at the moment, but I think it's going to really come down to how much demand comes through over the next few months. Current lockdown and quarantines has sort of suppressed demand slightly. We are still getting bookings coming in, but they are tending to be sort of for later on in the year. So early sort of May, June time, prices are sort of quite competitive. But as you go through the year, especially on the short haul programs where we think demand is going to come back, then it gets tighter and more price sensitive towards the end of the year.
And what would your advice be anyway on booking? So should people be booking now for this year, booking ahead, or should they kind of wait and see what happens and book last minute?
I'm always going to say that they should be booking now because it's our business. But just talking sort of from a practical level, if you book with a tour operator, as Paul said earlier, everything that you book is sort of financially protected. And so if you're actually looking for a specific holiday in a property that you want to guarantee certain rooms or there's limited availability, then yes, definitely book now. And I think certainly a lot of our customers travel with us year on year. They know which property they want to go back to. They know which weeks they normally travel. And so they're taking the opportunity to lock that in, knowing that should anything change, then we've got certain COVID promises in place, and we're being sort of as flexible as we can in moving them should the situation change. And I think going forward this year, it's very much going to be about making sure that you book with a holiday company where you know there's somebody at the end of the phone that can deal with your queries, and that's keeping on top of the regulations, really, because things last year moved so quickly, whether it was the introduction of PLF forms, and sort of depending on which destination you were going to, everything changed, and it changed overnight often. So a company that sort of specializes in particular destinations or has the amount of staff on hand to react to those situations, it just means that you're in a much safer position.
Oh, absolutely. I think that was really brought home. I mean, certainly at Wanderlust, we're big advocates of saying use a really good travel company or travel agency when booking your trips. But I think the crisis of the last year has really brought that home. So, well, with just going back to insurance, and as I say, we've got a lot of insurance questions coming in anyway. So, Chris O'Hara, if the FCO, and of course it's now called the FCDO, so yeah, the Foreign Office, if they say that we can't travel somewhere, then what is it true that your insurance will be invalidated? I think there's a lot of confusion around that. So, can people still travel if the FCO says don't go? What will happen to their insurance?
There are two types of cancellation claim, Lynn. It's important, I think, to start by mentioning there's a huge difference between you becoming ill or breaking your ankle 3 or 4 days before your booked holiday and the airline or the tour operator being forced to cancel your trip. Now, the good news is that many of the tour operators have been extraordinarily supportive to their customers. So if an airline or a tour operator is forced to cancel, they have been bending over backwards, some of them working 12-hour days, in order to sort the backlog out. But I think it's important to remember that travel insurance won't cover you for everything. And I think it's often a last-minute purchase as well. So in my experience, customers have been booking their holiday or their trip maybe 6 or 8 months in advance, but then they're only taking out their travel insurance 3 or 4 days before departure. So my recommendation would be to book it at the time of taking out the holiday reservation. And I'll just pick up on something that was mentioned a minute ago. I would be extremely cautious of booking independent travel at the moment, unless you can get some kind of guarantee whereby you can cancel the hotel 72 hours before arrival. Now, there are some of the search engines, booking engines, will allow you to do that. But I'm just reminded of a situation from some of my colleagues, ex-colleagues, who used to say, do be careful booking your own holiday, your own trip, because if you want to be your own travel agent, then you might end up on your own.
Yeah, so something to bear in mind, definitely, for people, isn't it? Some people aren't going to be too worried about that, but others are.
Can I just interject there, Lynn?
Yeah.
I was just going to say we have had people that have continued to travel against FCDO advice, and there has been sort of particular specialist policies that they've been able to take out. I think when the travel against FCDO advice was originally brought in, it was normally the reason for FCDO advice to change was normally due to a civil unrest or that sort of thing. And this year's really changed that and flipped it on its head in that advice is now changing on the fact that the government have taken away a travel corridor. And so it's being used as a very different mechanism. So because of that, we have had people that have still felt that it's safe to travel to destinations, and as long as they've managed to secure a policy that does cover them against FCDO advice, then we've allowed them to travel.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes,
So
I can add to that, in that there are this week, the Home Secretary, Priti Patel's name was mentioned earlier. And just to give you a quick example, if you are travelling to Thailand at the end of next week on a 1-year fixed term contract, then you won't be prevented from going.
oh, that's Chris frozen. He has on mine.
Yeah.
Okay. Chris, we can't hear you. I don't know if you can hear us. Oh,
I can hear you all. I was
okay.
simply going to say that if you turn up at the airport and you want to go to Barbados and you think you might get a bar job at the other end, that is when you might be in for a £500 fine.
Okay. Okay. And then, Chris, while you're there, because I'm just looking at the questions, and here's an insurance question for you. So somebody's saying they've booked a flight with EasyJet to Mallorca in June this year, but they're yet to buy the insurance. So as you say, this is somebody who hasn't bought the insurance yet. But if they do buy their insurance now, if their flights are cancelled, can they cancel their insurance too?
Okay, it depends entirely on the individual insurance provider. There are some out there. True Traveller, for example, will allow you to book your flight 3 or 4 months in advance and then take out the policy 2 days before. That's no problem. You clearly don't benefit from any cancellation cover until you've paid the premium. But in terms of wanting to cancel, there's a big difference, I think, between you deciding not to go, which is disinclination to travel. That's not insured, and the airline, for technical reasons or for safety reasons, they may want to suggest that you travel on another date. But in terms of you getting your money back, if the airline have agreed to move you to another date, then obviously that's not a valid insurance claim because you haven't lost anything.
Right. Okay. Moving on from insurance for a bit. Paul, somebody asked about, do we think that there'll be COVID certificates required now in the same way that, there's yellow fever certificates? Are we all going to be expected to have some sort of certificate to show that we're COVID free or we've been vaccinated?
One of the difficulties, I think, during this pandemic has been the lack of consistency, not only from some individual governments, but also from governments not working together around the world. And it's something that groups like the World Travel and Tourism Council have been calling for from day one, because they've seen this before where governments don't work together. And it's particularly disappointing, I think, that they haven't been able to bang heads together, even at G7 level or G20 level properly, and come up with the protocols that are going to matter worldwide to stop consumer confidence failing and to stop consumers being unsure of whether they need a certificate, a passport. Obviously, we are seeing individual airlines develop passes. We're seeing IATA develop trialing passes with airlines. We're seeing individual companies like Microsoft and Oracle team up to develop possible vaccine digital passports of some kind. So we're at a very early stage in this area. What worries me is that once you put in place measures like that, you're starting to affect seamless travel. You're starting to put barriers in place. When consumers start having to, add on documents and add on things to what they need to prepare for their holiday, it gets complicated. And the last thing this pandemic needs is any more complexity on top of the quarantine measures already in place. Already you have to research and almost go to a library to find out what's going on in each country, what you'll need before you get there, whether you have to quarantine on your way back, whether you'll have to do a PCR test, what sort of test will be accepted. The list goes on. And it does worry me about some of these. I think I think essentially the other thing to bear in mind is that some countries are going to take much longer to vaccinate their population than the UK is. The UK is seemingly on a successful rollout path, but other countries, as we know, especially in Europe, are not at the same level, and that's going to breed all sorts of issues. So the moment you start putting in vaccination certificates, etc., is the moment you start creating barriers to travel. So I'm not in favour of them. Yes, we may find that in some instances you have to have them, but at the moment it's not clear at all how that's going to roll out.
Okay. Well, I think we're all agog to know that one, though, aren't we? Because yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I think
Cool.
it boils down to individual countries, and so you're going to need that's another good reason for booking through a tour operator at the moment, actually, because they will be following the latest advice. And if you're booking independently, you might miss something that the operator will be aware of, especially if they're a specialist to a certain destination.
Yeah. Somebody, for instance, has asked, do they have to be vaccinated to travel on a cruise? And I think they're probably partly asking this because I think it's Saga, isn't it, who have said that people will need to be.
Yes, and other cruise
But
lines have said it's
yeah.
just their staff and not the passengers. So it's going to depend again on each cruise line. Of course, we don't have a set date for cruising to start again anyway.
No, absolutely. And not surprisingly, a lot of people are asking about individual countries, individual trips, and we might try and cover off some of those. In fact, Corfu, Chris, one very much for you, because what's the situation in Greece this year? Is somebody likely to be able to travel to Greece this year?
I was just looking at the case numbers before coming on the call, and Greece has currently got 35 cases per 100,000 compared to 351 in the UK. So they've done extremely well keeping the cases down. They were one of the only countries to remain on the UK quarantine list, travel corridor list, right the way through until October, really. And Corfu, Rhodes, and some of the other islands has still managed to stay on the list until it was withdrawn a few weeks ago. So I think they've done very well as a country. They rely very much on tourism. And so a lot of their lockdown strategy has been based around the fact that they want to open up and welcome tourists back, or they need to for the summer ahead. I think just looking at it, the islands are all very spaced out. Everybody lives in a very different way. And so the idea is that once summer kicks in again, that things will open up. And they'll be, the idea at the moment is they'll be looking to welcome tourists back from May. I think it'll very much depend on where the UK is and where the case numbers are in the UK. But I think out of everywhere in Europe, you stand a good chance of Greece being one of the ones that are opening up to tourists. The tourism minister has been very vocal here, in that he was one of the ones that was pushing the EU to introduce a vaccination passport. But at the same time, he's been very adamant that it won't be a requirement to come into the country. It just may mean that there's less checks and things in place if you do have a vaccine certificate of some sort. So they're very sort of pro, and they're working very proactively.
And I think you've made a good point there about obviously Greece wants the tourism. It's important to them. And I noticed somebody in the chat box asked, and no reason why not, saying, should we really be traveling at all? Should it be our responsibility not to travel? But I think we've also got to face it that livelihoods are being lost in places, and there are people desperate for us to go to their destination. Does anybody want to comment on that?
I think Greece is a prime example where it makes up such a huge part of their GDP that however you look at it, they do need tourism to open, but they're also mindful that they need to keep their local population safe and well. And I think, it's just a balancing act. And once the temperatures start to improve and people are outside more than being stuck indoors, I think they'll look at it very closely and do that. If you look at places like Namibia, Botswana in Africa, again, their livelihoods there depend on tourism to an extent, and it has such a devastating impact on destinations when they don't have tourism that it is a fine balance. And I think it's just something that every destination will look at, and where they can open safely, then they will do.
Lynn, I'm going to come back on
Yeah.
this and be really clear about what I think is going to happen over the next few months. I think nobody is saying at the moment we should be traveling. Everyone's agreed on that. So let me just kill that immediately. We're not advocating travel at the moment. It's illegal, so you shouldn't be doing it. I do think that when you've got a country like the UK with 30 million people vaccinated by the end of March, and infections are starting to come down, and the NHS is under less pressure, and the warmer weather is arriving at the end of March, you're going to be in a different position to where we are today on a freezing cold, wintry day in England. It's going to feel very different at the end of March. Now, I still don't think things will be opening up then outside of the UK. I think we will see staycations start at the end of March. But like Chris was saying, I'm an advocate for the 1st of May onwards, and I've been very clear on that for some weeks now. I think in May, you're going to see Europe in a very different place. You're going to see more vaccination programs rolled out, not just in the UK, but elsewhere, and a bit more confidence because of the warmer weather when more people are outside. So I think it's quite likely some destinations will open up during May, especially Greece, and some won't. You're going to have a patchwork of destinations open. So that's why the late booking market will be so big this year, because people will be waiting until the last minute to get that confidence to book, knowing that the numbers are down quite substantially. The problem I'm worried about is that with the introduction of hotel quarantines in this country, that the government sticks by that policy for some time and doesn't take them away, and will be very nervous because of scientific advice about reducing the number of high-risk zones. So the danger for consumers is a bit like the travel corridors last year, that hotel quarantine could be added to countries at the last minute should they suddenly go into a high-risk zone. And that's what we're going to be fighting against this year, I think.
Yeah, because so there will be that uncertainty that yes, even if you have gone somewhere and it's open, obviously things can change, and leading to quarantine or whatever. And Corfu, Chris, what would happen? I mean, somebody asked if they're going away and the FCO advice has changed, and I guess this has happened as well. They might already be away and the FCO advice has changed. What happens? What happens to their holiday?
I think if you're already away, then the advice has normally been that you can continue your holiday as planned and return as normal at the end of it. And where we've seen sort of advice come in very quickly, we as a company have tried to amend itineraries and sort of adapt and move very quickly with the times to keep people safe and traveling. I think when you're booking a holiday, it's an important question to ask the company that you're booking with. If the FCDO advice changes, what are your terms? As a company ourselves, we stick by it, and as soon as that advice changes, then we allow customers to cancel, defer, or get a refund. So it's a big question. I think travellers really do need to have a series of questions that they ask the company that they're booking with, and almost tick them off. And what happens if FCDO advice changes should be one of those questions.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that because yes, we're also advocating using a trusted tour operator, but presumably there are certain questions we should ask. I'm delighted to see that Sunvil, for instance, your company, you've got some sort of pledge or promise, as a lot of companies do, that you're going to look after people. If I can ask you a question from the chat box, somebody has asked a question. It's about a competitor of yours, Chris, but they say, and this is obviously a kind of predicament that will happen to a lot of people, they're due to do a tour of Turkey in May with this other company. The final payment is due in the first week of February. What do they do? Should they resist paying this until the trip is confirmed that it will definitely go ahead?
I think it's a question that they should ask of the company that they're traveling with. And I know from our personal take, we're allowing people to defer making that decision until close to the time. But equally, we're saying that if you do pay your balance now and the situation changes, then you will get a refund should you not be able to travel. So we're getting a lot of people that are paying up their balances on time as normal, because they know that should the situation change and they're not able to travel, then we will either refund that or defer their holiday to a later stage. And as I said earlier, it's all about the communication. And as long as you've got that communication with your tour operator, ask the questions, make sure that you're getting the answers that you need. And as long as you are, then you're safe to pay on the understanding that should the worst happen and the operator fail, then you would get the money back from either the Civil Aviation Authority or ABTA or some industry body.
Yeah, because again, somebody in here has asked about how they find a good travel agent, because looks like they were let down last year at the start of the pandemic. So they've had a bad experience. So how do they find a good one now? Is it a case, other than of course Sunvil, who we know are wonderful, but what should they be looking for? How should they look for a really good, trusted travel agent or tour operator?
I think where you're looking at a travel agent, it's quite a misunderstood situation, and the travel agent is acting as the name suggests. They're acting as an agent for a tour operator or an airline, and travel agents came under a lot of pressure and got bad publicity because they weren't refunding in a lot of cases, and that really came down to the fact that they weren't getting those refunds from tour operators or airlines. In a lot of cases, the airlines weren't sort of being very proactive in refunding back at the beginning, just because of the volume of refunds that were needing to be paid out. I would always suggest going with an independent, well-known sort of tour operator. We feature sort of quite a lot. There's quite a lot of groups out there, but just do your research. And a lot of sort of Facebook groups now have sort of comments and reviews and that sort of thing, and just sort of make sure you check them out before you use them. But in the main, it's the company that the agent is dealing with that would be making those refunds. So look out for the ATOL protection, ABTA protection, and make sure that they've got some sort of bonding in place.
Yeah, and I think I'll just do a quick shout out for another association called ATO, which I know you're a member of. And that's the Association of Independent Tour Operators. And I believe they are involved in destinations. They've got a booth or an area. And some very good independent companies belong to ATO, and they are all very good quality ones.
I think the other thing, Lynn, is that undoubtedly the magazines like Wanderlust, like some others I can mention, do tend to check, and they research very well before talking about particular operators. So it's worth bearing in mind their recommendations. The other important thing is not to cancel your trip at the moment. Leave it until you hear from the airline or from the tour operator that the trip is not going ahead. There are lots of people I know, and some have been asking questions, who are concerned about whether they should cancel on their own part. I would never recommend that. You wait until the action is taken by the airline or by the operator before doing anything to cancel your booking. Otherwise, clearly, you're going to lose your rights.
Yes, I
Very
agree
good
with
advice.
that. And in regards to the most common question that we have had over recent weeks and months is, will I be covered for coronavirus if I continue with the holiday and I'm legally allowed to go on the holiday? Well, people do have short memories, and I agree with what was said a moment ago in regards to once we get to May, it'll be a very different place. We do have short memories in this country. There is pent-up demand. And so I think once we get more and more people vaccinated, we are going to get more questions about the FCDO advice. And interestingly, if you take out a policy with ourselves, with True Traveller, for example, then for many, many countries, there is no cover specifically for coronavirus, because it is mentioned as one of the warnings on the country-specific site. Now, if you go out there with that knowledge and then the warning is removed 3 weeks later, you then do have cover. So there's a lot of confusion about am I or aren't I, and that's why it's so vitally important to check these things when you book, but you also need to check them a few days before you travel as well.
Yeah, I think an awful lot of this, the message that's coming out for all of you really is about communications. You know, you've got to be asking your travel company or your travel agent, you've got to be asking your insurance company. Don't take anything for granted.
No, it's a really important point, and actually that also means for government ministers as well, I must say, because government ministers have not been communicating well on this matter. In the last few days, they have been advising people not to book summer holidays overseas. And I don't think government ministers should be doing that. They are there to give us public health advice, not to give their opinion on whether you should be booking or not, because every time they say don't book, it damages the sector, their own sector, part of their own economy. So communications are important as long as they're the right communications. And I'm afraid the government on this one have not generally got it right, which is why trust in tour operators especially has gone up substantially over the last few weeks.
Mm. Oh, absolutely right. And I think that is really coming through. Just before I go to some more of the questions that come through on the feed, Chris O'Hara, what about EHICs and GHICs? Because before the this event, I had a question come through about that. So just to remind people, traveling in Europe, a lot of people used EHIC cards. That meant that you could get reciprocal health arrangements, health free of charge. What is the situation on that? Because there seems to be a bit of confusion about it, thanks to the word Brexit.
There has been, yes, the Brexit word. So the good news on EHICs is that whilst they did end on the 31st of December, they are in fact valid for 5 years. You need to check if you're in possession of an EHIC card. You do need to dig it out, because a lot of them will have been applied for last year or the year before, and so they may well have 3 years validity left on them. So your EHIC is valid until the date stated on it. If you are in possession of one that's just expired, you can indeed apply for a GHIC on the .gov website. It'll take you to an NHS link, and I would recommend doing it. I really would. They take about 10 days, or the government website is saying that they take about 10 days to come through. But it's really good to explain that EHICs and GHICs are not a substitute for travel insurance. And I'll give you one very quick example. They don't cover mountain rescue for all the skiers out there. They don't cover repatriation either. So it's really good to have a travel insurance policy to run alongside your EHIC or GHIC, because then you are fully protected.
Right, yeah, no, absolutely. I think we'd all back that. Now, we are running out of time, which is such a shame when we got so many questions. I'm going to do real quick fire ones. What are the chances of going skiing this season, and should people be booking ahead for skiing next season?
I'd say book ahead for next season. Sadly, this season I think is a bit of a write-off. Very sad indeed for many operators, but the bookings are strong for next winter, and there is an expectation they will happen when many more people are vaccinated. So I'd say book for December onwards.
Yeah. Somebody's booked to go to Southern Africa for 4 weeks, September, October. What are the chances of that going ahead?
Stick with it.
I'd say that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think I'd be a little bit cautious of that one, because September is going. You're coming out of the South African winter period. South Africa, the strain is still not under control. Obviously, everyone can't wait to go back to that beautiful country, but I fear it's going to take a bit longer for South Africa to open up. So I'd be a little cautious of that. If you've already booked it, don't cancel it. Wait until it's cancelled.
Yeah. Okay. I'll answer this one. Somebody asked about Australia in May. No, don't do it. I don't think you'll be going to Australia this year. I was meant to. I won't be going either, which is really sad. Somebody was asking about booking ahead, though, for next year. Absolutely. I think we'd all agree that, wouldn't we? Okay.
Definitely.
Right. we are out of time, which is really sad. Thank you so much. You've been a great panel. So sorry we couldn't answer all the questions. And we're going to go back to Andrew in the studio. But thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, what a fantastic session there. Thank you to Lynn and all the rest of the panel. Our apologies if we didn't get to your question, but as you can imagine, we have lots more coming up for you. Again, a huge thank you to Lynn and the panel there. Do head over to the Wanderlust virtual stand, which you can find by clicking on exhibitors and then just scrolling down to Wanderlust. It's right there.
Hi everyone, I'm Rosie, the Special Features Editor at Wanderlust, the UK's leading travel magazine that's just won Travel Magazine of the Year. We've got loads of exciting stuff planned, including a fresh look for the magazine. You can enjoy 6 double issues a year packed with inspiring travel content. We're going further off the beaten track than ever before, taking you to destinations we've never covered and finding places that you've probably never heard of. We've got loads of exciting stuff planned online too, so do keep an eye out for our immersive articles, our videos and our Spotify playlist. After the talk, make sure you drop by the Wanderlust virtual stand to find out more and to see how you can become a Wanderlust Club member.